I was actually a Peace Corps volunteer living in West Africa. And in Ghana, your SIM card is your bank account. And I did what everyone's biggest fear is when they're on an outhouse. I dropped my phone. This is not your every North Country privy or Adirondack privy. This is a 30-foot pit. 15 people were crowded in it, looking at this toilet like it was the smelliest claw machine you'd ever seen.
That's Grace Hiltunen, live on stage at the 1844 house in Potsdam. And on today's episode of the show, we're headed to West Africa. From NCPR and the Adirondack Center for Writing, this is The Howl. I'm Ethan Shanty. I'm kind of a coward, and I'm not afraid to admit it. This October, when my girlfriend Erin asked me if I wanted to go to a haunted house with her, I said, there's no way you can get me to go into one of those, even with a gun to my head. This is kind of a surprise to her because, left to my own devices, I could honestly sit and watch 4 or 5 or 6 horror movies in a day. Stephen King, the so-called king of horror, he's my favorite author, and I've spent more time listening to true crime podcasts than I'm proud to admit. That stuff can't reach out and grab me, though. I can tell myself it's not real, but when it comes to real-world stuff, I'm a little jumpy. I'm obsessed with horror movies, but yeah, if I saw a ghost in real life, I'd probably collapse and die. I mean, one time I was walking through the studio hallway at NCPR when a plastic bag fell off of a desk and my heart basically jumped out of my chest. And a few years ago, I was living with some roommates, and yes, I was honestly watching a horror movie. We had 3 cats there. 2 gray and white cats and 1 black and white cat. They would get up to no good in the middle of the night, as cats are wont to do. And out of the corner of my eye, I saw them gathering near one of the bookcases. One of them hissed, and I whipped around to tell them to quit being mean to each other when I noticed that suddenly we had 4 cats, and one of them was Snow White. It was about that time that I realized that this Snow White 4th cat was not in fact a cat, but a weasel, what you might otherwise call a stoat or an ermine. And as that realization hit my brain, so too did it hit my legs, catapulting me out of my chair with a cry of, "Jesus, what the hell?" I was the only one awake at the time in the house, and fearing for my life, I crept to the closet to get a broom. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do with that broom, but without a flamethrower, it was the next best thing for this late night intruder. The cats scattered and I watched this weasel, crawl under the radiator. And for the next 10 minutes, I tried to scare it by banging on the radiator and swiping at it in the little crevice below. It didn't budge. All it did was hiss. And probably for the best too, because I'd really be screwed if it came out and decided to crawl up my leg. I needed reinforcements. So I went upstairs. I knocked on my roommate's door. I said, "Cody, hey, I need your help. There's a weasel in the house." And 10 seconds passed before he said sleepily, "I don't care." So with that, I gave up. I put the broom back in the closet. I got a towel from the bathroom. I went to my bedroom, shoved the towel under the door, and went to sleep. I'm not too afraid to admit when I've lost the battle. And so when I tell you that today's first story is about snakes, you can probably imagine why I'm not the ideal person to be the hero in this situation. Luckily, there are braver men than me in this world, men of action, men who can take on snakes that can spit venom up to 25 feet. Here's Tom Langen.
All right. Well, I grew up watching nature adventure shows, things like Doctari, Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom, Cowboy in Africa. I had the lunchbox. And I learned from those shows that someday I would face dangers like quicksand and malaria and venomous snakes and dangerous big cats. And in fact, in my life, I've had close calls with 3 of those. And this is one of those. So I was living in a remote area of West Africa, in a little walled compound, adobe compound, a little house, a room about as big as a bed, a crumbling outhouse with no roof, a little storage shed, and a little kitchen big enough for a table and a little gas stove and some shelving. And I had a couple of kids who hung around the compound and did chores and helped teach me Moray and the culture and so forth. And they did chores, and one day a kid went into the kitchen to do some sweeping, and he ran out going, "Snake! Snake!" Now, this kid was afraid of most everything, including the geckos on the wall, which he was convinced had a venomous sting. I said, "No worries, I'll go take care of it." He said, "You don't understand. It's this big and black, and it's the kind that spits at you." Now, I knew something from those nature shows, and that is that black spitting cobras have a powerful venom. They are very aggressive. They are highly territorial. They can throw their venom accurately at eyes up to 25 feet. I was well over 24 hours from the nearest antivenom. And so I faced a decision. Do I go run over to the kitchen, slam the door, lock it, and never go in there again? Or do I take care of this problem? So I walked over to the storage shed. I selected my weapons, a shovel and a rake. I put on my safety gear, my motorcycle goggles, and I walked towards the kitchen with trepidation, not thinking about the fact that my armor was a t-shirt, shorts, and flip-flops. I entered the kitchen, looked around, nothing was amiss. I noticed a little rodent hole, and I started to stoop down to look at it. And out came a big black snake that reached its head, looked at me, opened its hood, and then went into the stove. This would have been a good time for me to run out of that kitchen. Instead, I pulled the gas stove over. It popped up again, looked at me again, went behind the shelving. I pulled the shelving down with the rake. Onions rolling, rice bag breaking open, cans rolling, and the snake comes out towards me. Shaking, heart racing, I go chop and cut its tail off. Now it was really pissed. And so it came at me. I pushed it away with a shovel. It came again. I pushed it away like 3 or 4 times. Finally, I got a moment. I was able to do it, and I was able to finish the job. After my heart rate dropped about half and I started to be able to move again, I moved it and ceremoniously buried it in the compost pile to the awe of the kids. And, I felt a sense of pride, but also very bad. I've never killed a snake before, and I've never intentionally killed a snake since. But I did learn, first of all, that whenever I would go into any room in that compound, to always look carefully first and have a shovel or broom ready. And more importantly, I learned that always, 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 to avoid a tragedy and to make it a close call, always listen to kids when they say that there's danger. Thank you.
That was Tom Langen, live on stage at the 1844 house in Potsdam just a few months ago. We're not done with West Africa yet. Grace Hiltunen was a first-time Howl storyteller at the 1844 house, and this one got her 3rd place that night. Here's Grace.
All right, so I'm a little nervous. I hate public speaking, but here I am. But thank you. So not so long ago, before I moved to Potsdam, I was actually a Peace Corps volunteer living in West Africa. In West Africa, I was living in this beautiful home, 4 bedrooms, no running water, no electricity, which meant I had to use an outhouse. Now, this outhouse was about a 1/4 mile away from my actual house, but it was mine, had a lock on the door. But I'd have to walk in front of the whole village to get to my outhouse every morning. So I decided that I would wake up at 4 a.m. every morning to go take my morning poop. So nobody would see me take my morning poop because I'd have to say hi to everyone because that's how it is in Ghana. Now, so one fateful morning, and every morning, I would do my, New York Times puzzles, as people do, to kind of have a routine. So I was doing my New York Times puzzles on my toilet, and I stood up, and I did what everyone's biggest fear is when they're on an outhouse. I dropped my phone down the toilet. Now, this is not your every North Country privy or Adirondack privy. This is a 30-foot pit with a cement top, with a tiny hole, with a cemented toilet on this tiny hole, with cemented walls, with a bolted ceiling. Now, I looked at my phone and I was like, is this okay? Is this okay? Like, will this be all fine? And then I realized, no, actually, it's not. I didn't back up my phone. And in Ghana, your SIM card is your bank account. And all of the phone numbers for all of the Peace Corps headquarters and everybody that I had needed contact with was on that phone, and I did not back it up. And so I looked at my phone, and I was like, well, what am I going to do? And I was like, all right, well, there's only one thing I can do. So I ran over to my neighbor Pat's house and I said, Pat, I dropped my phone down my Fuji at 4 a.m. Well, this was probably about 4:15 a.m. And so she goes, oh no. And she stands up and she goes to her husband, and her husband goes to the neighbor, and the neighbor goes to the next neighbor. And then the neighbor calls the headmaster, and the headmaster calls the chief, and within an hour, the entire village was surrounding my outhouse. Now, this outhouse is also the general size you would think an outhouse would be. Slightly bigger, maybe about the size of this table. Now, 15 people were crowded in it, looking at this toilet like it was the smelliest claw machine you'd ever seen. And I told them, guys, I really do need this phone back. I know this is ridiculous, but I really do. And so they said, all right, we got it. We got you. Not a single one of them laughed. Not a single one of them made fun of me. Now they got to business. They ripped off the door. They took the hinges off, and then they bolted together 2 giant sticks to try to meander it through. That didn't work. So then they took palm trees and they braided them together, and that didn't work. And then they dropped flashlights down it. Like, each person would kind of step up and be like, all right, this is my turn to take the stone out of the sword, or the sword out of the stone, or whatever. And none of them were working. And I was really getting nervous. I was like, oh no, I'm going to be pooping on my phone every single morning. Am I really going to do this for another year? And how will I live that down? Now, so I was thinking about this, and the chief was sitting there kind of delegating everyone to try to fix this problem. And it was the whole thing. And then this woman comes walking out from the distance, kind of hunched over. She comes with a pot hook about this long and a rope. And she silently comes in, she drops it down, and she pulls it up with one foul stroke. And that phone is still the phone I use today. And that's my close call.
Thanks to Grace and Tom for their stories on this episode of The Howl. Don't forget you can hear more episodes of this show wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, throw us a few bucks at ncpr.org/give. The show is written, produced, and edited by me. I'm Ethan Shanty. I also recorded those stories at the 1844 house. Our digital team is Bill Hanel. He's our digital director. Doyle Dean is our production manager. And Caitlin Kelly is master of all things social media. David Summerstein is our script supervisor. And our theme music is by famous letter writer of Plattsburgh. Thanks to Natalie Thill and Tyler Barton of the Adirondack Center for Writing. You can find out more about ACW at our website. And coming up on next week's show...
Here's the thing. If you ever want to ruin somebody's life, find their weakness. And for Chef Tom, it was definitely pride. The physical manifestation of his pride was this tallow swan he had created. And I go, oh, looks like a buttered duck to me.
See you next time. From North Country Public Radio, I'm Ethan Shanty. This is NCPR.